The Kidnapped Bride. This is a love story of an American Christian groom searching for his kidnapped Sudanese Dinka bride. She was abducted from her village in South Sudan by the Muslim invaders, brought to the Darfur region, and sold as a slave. It was written in English and translated into Arabic by Dr. A. Ahmed. Copyright. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer who may quote brief passages in a review for print in a newspaper, general magazine, or school journal. All the characters in this book are fictitious, and any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is merely coincidental. Chapter 51. The Sharia court issues a verdict of obedience against a disobedient Muslim wife. The next day, after the second wife, Olivia, left, the first wife, Ayan, received a small invitation letter from the Sharia court in El Fasher city. She is addressed under the names Ayan Majok and Ikhlas Abdullah Dang, who was previously known as the Southern Dinka Christian girl, Al-Qadham Al-Gulafa, or the slave, the uncircumcised infidel woman. The report stated that she must appear the next morning before the blessed judge of the Sharia court, Al-Sheikh Isa Musa Harun Ibrahim. The Southern Christian lawyer does not understand why the freed Dinka girl Ikhlas is to appear in court again. Her slavery case had already been considered by judges and juries in the Sharia court as well as the criminal court. Mr. Akal laughed at the invitation and assured the couple, Malwal and Ayan, that the Sharia court had no authority to change the decision of the criminal court. Whatever the Sharia court judge decides, he will not be able to return the Southern girl, Ayan Majok, to the house of slavery again and live as the Dinka slave girl Ikhlas Abdullah Dang. She has been liberated from that slavery forever, and no force on earth can deprive her or strip her of her freedom, no matter the cost. All she has to do is go to the Sharia courtroom tomorrow, bear the merits of the trial, and leave safely and freely. Therefore, Mr. Akal's encouraging words gave peace of mind to the Dinka wife, Ayan, and her American husband, Malwal. Before her departure, Olivia had divided the spoils that she had recovered from the Al-Hambadi bandit Wad Mahira bint Aboud after killing him, leaving the first half to Malwal and taking the other half with her. She put a hefty sum of money and gold in a box and gave them to Mr. Akal to pass on to her ex-husband along with her final farewell message. Malwal was surprised when he opened the large package and found money and gold. The huge sum of money she left after her departure confirmed her intense love for him and increased his longing for her. Even his Dinka wife, Ayan, was also amazed at the large amount of money the Azanda girl Olivia had left them. Malwal promised his Dinka wife that he would buy her some beautiful dresses when they arrived at Heathrow International Airport in London during their trip to the United States. They only had 3 days remaining before they left. The wife, Ikhlas, encouraged her husband, Malwal, to give some money to Mr. Akal and his family. Her American husband accepted her proposal and gave some money to his wife's legal lawyer, who courageously defended her amidst great opposition and hostility from racist Arabs. The Christian lawyer and his wife, Mary, were touched by the couple's generosity and prepared a large feast to celebrate their imminent departure. The next day, inside a small room in the main complex of the small cases court, a group of religious judges gathered and waited for the Nashis or disobedient Muslim wife to arrive. When the couple, Malwal and Ayan, entered the small room, at first they thought they had arrived at the wrong place, but the presence of their arch-enemy, Imam Abdul Razak al-Mahdi, dispelled their suspicions. There are few people who have nothing to do in life other than poking their noses into other people's affairs, scattered across the 10 chairs that fill half the Sharia courtroom. 3 judges of the Sharia court of Allah and His Prophet, dressed in religious robes, sit on wooden chairs on a platform behind a large table inside the room facing the audience as in a mosque, waiting for the Imam and the Mamun to begin the congregational prayer or the funeral prayer for the disobedient wife. There are 4 policemen armed to the teeth, 2 of them sitting on chairs at the main door, and 2 guarding the space between the audience and the panel of court. The African couple, Malwal and Ayan, entered and sat slowly and fearfully on 2 chairs without greeting the religious group. The beautiful and sexy Dinka girl, who was recently freed from the bondage of the Islamic hijab and abaya, wore a noticeably short dress that revealed her long legs and half of her thighs and hips. Her big ass and highly raised pomegranate-like boobs were half visible. The short dress was given to her by the Christian woman, Mary, Mr. Akal's wife. So, it is smaller than her height and narrower than her large body, thus, it became like an outfit called a hugging dress that a girl wears to show off her sexy body and inner charms. She is sexy, attractive, and hot in that tight and short dress. The eyes of the 3 holy judges of the Sharia court of God and his messenger followed her until she sat down. Even as she sat, their eyes were still focused on her exposed thighs, like hungry wolves looking at a stray lamb. Ayn did all she could to discourage their unseemly glances, but when nothing seemed to help her to protect herself from their curiosity, she took out her handkerchief, placed it on her thighs, and put both hands in her lap. However, the eyes of the 3 judges continued to devour her half-naked body. She felt their eyes like X-rays penetrating all her layers of flesh and clothing. It was as if she were sitting naked in front of them, and they could see her inner nakedness, such as her black pubic hair and pussy. Those men of God follow the commandment of the Prophet Muhammad, who said, "A first look at the woman is for you, and the second look is against you." If a Muslim man sees a beautiful woman, averts his gaze, and then looks at her again, he will be in danger of committing a munkar sin and exposing himself to entering hell on the day of resurrection. But an intelligent man, like these 3 righteous judges, can manipulate this religious restriction without committing an evil haram act. To avoid punishment in the grave, though the 2 angels of death, Munkar and Nakir, and bitten by the bald-headed snake, the 3 old men kept their first sight fixed on the sexy, half-naked body of the Dinka wife. They look at her sexy legs, her thighs, her bare shoulders, her beautiful face, and her curly afro hair. Their tears may flow, their eyes may dry, and they may fly, plucking their eyes from their hollows and making their faces stiff, but none of them changed their gaze or blinked for a moment until the angry Imam Abdul Razak was forced to protest against their obscene, inappropriate, and immoral behavior. Out of jealousy, not righteousness, the adulterous Imam woke the 3 judges from their lustful coma by reciting a well-known condemnation prayer based on a verse from the Holy Quran. Oh, our Lord, do not hold us accountable for what the evil guys among us did. Surat Al-Araf 7, verse 155. This powerful verse changed the judges' attitudes towards the sexy Dinka girl at once. Suddenly Ayn transformed from the beautiful and sexy virgin of heaven into the whore of Babylon, the wife of Satan. Moments ago, she was a virgin nymph of heaven or mermaid swimming in the river of wine in paradise, but suddenly she became a Jinniya bride of the Nile River, who is the consort of a Jinni. The nymph in the Quran is a beautiful virgin created by God for the sexual pleasure of a man in the Garden of Eden. Every Muslim man is promised by God that he will have 40 virgins in paradise if he dies a normal death, and if he dies a martyr, by blowing up his body in smithereens, he will have 72 virgins. A nymph girl is beautiful, loving, loyal, and always a virgin. She does not urinate, defecates, does not menstruate, and does not become pregnant with a child, even if the man had sex with her 1,000 times. When a Muslim man enters into a sexual relationship with a mermaid girl, she will become a virgin again as soon as the intercourse ends. This promise alone prompted many young Muslims to die as martyrs by having their bodies blown to bits and pieces. The 3 judges became angry towards the disobedient wife, Ayn, when they realized that she had led them into sin and placed them at the gates of hell. Therefore, they decided to punish her for her temptation and make sure that she would never appear again in this un-Islamic dress in a public place. One of God's righteous men asked, "Has the suspected disobedient Muslim wife come to the courtroom yet?" He said this knowing full well that the sexy girl who seduced them with her inner charms was her. Imam Abdul Razak al-Mahdi replied, "She is sitting in front of you." "Oh, Maulana Abdul Razak Wad al-Imam Muhammad Ahmed al-Mahdi, did you marry such a bad woman?" the same judge asked. This question challenged Maulana and made him feel that his religious integrity and commitment were at stake. As a result, he jumped to his feet and made some righteous moves towards his rival. Then the imam of the largest mosque in the city said, "This is her photo that I took a few days ago," pointing with his hand like a gun to a photo of Iqbal wearing one of her black abayas and veils in which she used to live like a butterfly inside her ugly cocoon. She was also coiled up like a turtle when she was an unpaid maidservant and sex slave in his sacred residence, which was called the House of Virtue, during his plea in the criminal court. Maulana continued, "This is how she covered her body and her private parts when she lived with me." The three judges did not believe that the girl in the picture was the same girl who had caused the fire of lust to ignite in their holy bodies. To make a comparison and get a better look, the blessed men of God ordered the beautiful, sexy, half-naked wife to stand before them. When Ayan came forward and stood in front of them, their eyes bulged out again. It took them a long time to compare the black demon in the picture to Miss Sudan standing in front of them, and in this way, they satisfied their insatiable sexual lust that only the fires of hell could satisfy. "Have you become a Christian girl?" asked one of them. In this way, they satisfied their insatiable sexual lust that only the fires of hell. Ayan replied, "I have been a Christian girl since childhood." Another judge asked, "Why did you throw away your Islamic abaya and hijab and wear a bad dress? This is a Christian dress worn by infidel Khojiat women." "I told you, I've been a Christian girl my whole life. Imam Abdul Razak was the one who forced me to convert to Islam and wear Muslim women's clothing." Ayan framed her answer as a challenge rather than a response. "Did you know that the Sharia court will flog you 53 lashes for wearing clothes like this? I am not a Muslim girl, so you can't force me to dress like a Muslim wife," Ayan shouted angrily. "It doesn't matter what religion you follow. As long as you live in a Muslim land, you must dress like a Muslim woman." The speaker of these words was pulling his long beard, and his eyes were red like burning coal. The Dinka wife Ayan realized that the judge's mind was as rigid as the Sharia law he had followed since childhood. Therefore, she decided not to get into unnecessary arguments that might force him to issue a flogging sentence against her. She heard that many southern Christian girls in the city of Khartoum were beaten with whips on their buttocks and bare backs for wearing pants and shirts. Maulana Abdul Razak's patience has run out once again. He cited another hadith of the Prophet for the three judges: "Whoever among you sees a munkar or a sinful act, let him change it with his hand. If he is unable, then with his tongue, and if he is unable, then with his heart, and this is the weakest of faith." This time, the three judges of the Sharia court of God and his Prophet knew that the Imam was publicly accusing them of having weak faith. To refute his words, one of them shouted at Ayan, reprimanding her, "I swear to God Almighty, if you were my daughter, I would cut you into pieces because of wearing these scandalous, dirty dress." Maulana Abdul Razak replied, saying, "You know that she is not your daughter, and you also know that she is my wife and my horma. Shouldn't you fulfill God's judgment on her and leave the rest to me?" The Imam's words left the judges with no choice but to end the gathering and issue a ruling of obedience to the disobedient wife of Imam Abdul Razak. Therefore, the main judge opened his mouth as big as he could and shouted, "I issue a verdict of obedience against the disobedient Muslim wife, Iqbal Abdullah Dang, wife of Imam Maulana Abdul Razak al-Mahdi. The police must immediately take her to the house of obedience in the home of her legitimate Muslim husband." Chapter 52. The disobedient Muslim wife in an obedient home. The house of obedience is the place where a disobedient Muslim wife or a rebellious woman is detained, where the police must, by order of the Sharia court, take her by force to live with her legal husband against her will. She is usually tied up and imprisoned inside a dark room until her husband is sure that she will not rebel against him again. During her discipline, she will be beaten, raped, and starved until she is subdued. In the Holy Quran, it is permissible for a husband to beat his rebellious wife. See Surat An-Nisa 4, verse 34. It is also in the hadith that the Prophet Muhammad said, "A man should not be asked why he beats his family." The American husband Malwal was expecting his Azanda wife, Olivia, to leave, but he did not expect that the police would take his Dinka wife, Ayan, from him soon as well, and that he would not be able to do anything to prevent them from taking her in front of his eyes. Immediately after the judge issued the obedience ruling on Imam Abdul Razak's disobedient wife, Iqlalaz Abdul Allah Dang, the police ordered her to follow them. The southern girl, Ayan, refused to obey their orders and tried to prevent them from taking her away. She struggled and screamed at the top of her lungs, but to no avail. Even Malwal tried to prevent the policemen from performing their duty. In response, he was severely beaten, kicked, slapped, and threatened with being thrown behind bars if he continued to obstruct justice. The police then dragged Iqlalaz out of the courtroom against her wishes. As she struggled, her short dress was wrapped above her waist, her little red swimsuit-like lingerie, and her thighs and hips were completely exposed to the spectators. In this inappropriate exposure, she was forcibly dragged into a police vehicle. Inside the police car, she was handcuffed and forced to lie on the floor of the vehicle. Her so-called Muslim husband Imam Abdul Razak refused to accompany the police car and his rebellious wife. He thought it would be a shame to be taken to his holy abode in a police car like a criminal. While the police vehicle was leaving the courtyard of the building of the Sharia court, the so-called Muslim wife who denounced her husband's authority continued to scream and struggle for her freedom and dignity as a human being. She lost her voice before the vehicle reached the residence of the Imam of the largest mosque in the city of El Fasher. Maulana has 4 legitimate Muslim wives and 4 separate homes. Each house is occupied by one wife and her offspring and is located in a different section of the city. On that day, the Imam asked the Sharia court to order the police to move his rebellious wife to a different house than the one she had been living in before their appearance at the recent slavery trial. In front of that house, many neighbors came to their doors to witness the implementation of the verdict of obedience on the disobedient wife of Maulana Abdul Razak al-Mahdi. The sight of the rebellious wife and the police amused them more than it angered them. Some young teenagers chanted for the police when they saw the rebellious wife, Iqlalaz, in her short, torn dress, red underwear, and her thighs and buttocks exposed. Some women protested because the policemen did not cover the awara or the private parts of the disobedient wife before they pulled her from the police vehicle and threw her into the house of obedience. Only teenage girls felt sorry for her. On that day, the angry Imam Abdul Razak was determined and swore by God Almighty and his noble messenger to calm his anger and take revenge for the humiliation of the long trial of slavery and adultery that he had gone through. He flogged his rebellious wife, Iqlalaz, on her hands, legs, buttocks, back, and shoulders with his long whip. He even slapped her and kicked her with his shoes in front of the onlookers because of the disgrace she brought to his good reputation and a scandal to his righteous family members. He told her that none of his wives had ever disobeyed him before. When the police managed to drag Iqlalaz into the house, some of the older boys wanted to follow them. But the Imam chased these children away with his rod, cursing them and cursing their parents for not disciplining them. However, the horny teenagers who became like hangry dogs who saw exposed fresh meat did not leave until the police intervened, frightened them, and chased them away with batons. Inside the house, Imam Abdul Razak locked his disobedient wife Iqlalaz in one of his dark and unused storerooms. Before he left the warehouse, he swore to God that he would not feed her any food or give her water until she changed her stubborn attitude and expelled the demons from her accursed head. Ayn did not know that she had become a real slave of Maulana until that day. Even her bitter experiences at the hands of Haj Radwan al-Taishi, Wad Mahira bint Aboud, and Bint al-Zubair Pasha did not make her feel that she had become a slave to any of them. In those days, she viewed them all as outlaws who did what was not approved by Sudanese law. But on this day, she realized that the Sudanese laws that were supposed to protect her freedom and preserve her dignity were the ones that enslaved her. For the first time, Ayn realized that she was living in a land without laws. Within this dark warehouse euphemistically called the House of Obedience, she was denied the basic human needs for human existence. Her alleged Muslim husband is determined not to allow her to leave the house of obedience until her spirit of resistance is broken, and she is tamed like a disobedient woman in the Quran to become an obedient Muslim wife like his other wives. He chained her to the bed and fed her like a mad woman or a mad dog. For 3 days, she did not have access to water or soap to wash her clothes or clean her body. She had no light or window except a small door that remained locked with a large padlock at all times. She is not even allowed to see or meet her infant daughter, Sakina, during those 3 days. On the 3rd day, the imprisoned Dinka wife, Ayan, cried bitterly when she realized that she had missed her train heading to the city of Kasti, then sailing by ship to Juba City and from there flying abroad to America. She thought that her American husband, Malwal, had left without her and traveled back to the United States of America, a land where women are treated with freedom and dignity and are allowed to have all their rights. She concluded that Malwal had certainly returned to a country where there were equal laws for all people, regardless of their gender, race, religion, or skin color. Chapter 53. In the wake of the explosion of righteous vigilante justice. Meanwhile, the departing American husband of the Dinka wife who was imprisoned in the House of Obedience stands like a statue in a crowded ship as he looks at the people and things before and around him. Even though several hours had passed since the ship had left Kasti City, he was still unable to focus on one thing. His mind is filled with hundreds of dark thoughts and thousands of dark memories. It is as if he has been thrown into a bottomless pit and is desperately trying to find his way out of this complete darkness. Sometimes people in situations like this are trapped inside their own heads and can't get out and see the world around them. It is as if these humans have ceased to exist mentally and have turned into vegetables. Medically, this condition is called clinical death. Even if the burden of all crimes against humanity since Chin killed his brother Abel were lifted, Malwal might not feel as guilty or miserable as he does now. His chest looked like a volcano erupting from molten rock, and guilt was eating away at his bleeding heart like a cancer that ravages the body of a person sick with a disease for which there is no cure. He felt he had committed the most heinous crime anyone could think of committing. He felt that his crime surpassed the crimes of the Nazi tyrant Hitler and the murderer Sultan Ali Dinar. He's like the hero killing the heroine at the end of a bloody struggle instead of saving her from the villain. Malwal remained in this miserable state until the ship reached the first port. In the port of Malakal, the second capital in the south, his soul was able to emerge from the shadowy world of Muslim Arab Janjaweed that had engulfed him for several days. His mind began to work again, and he became aware of himself. Since he left El Fasher, Malwal has eaten almost no food or drank any water. Only the instinct for survival forced him to eat little food and drink a few drops of water once a day. In the city of Malakal, his vision strengthened, and his mind began to remember those last dark and terrifying hours he spent in the western region of Sudan. He remembered how the injustice of the Sharia court forced him to transform from a law-abiding person into a law-breaking citizen. He knew and understood that the lawmakers of the country sided with the murderers and enslavers of his southern Christian people. Even their so-called divine Islamic Sharia laws give them the right to invade, attack, plunder, kill, rape, and enslave those they consider to be Christians, infidels, and immoral people. On that last fateful day in El Fasher, the American husband Malwal remembered a wise word that his rebel fellow soldier Olivia had shared with him one day in the woods. When the law fails to protect people, people must protect themselves through vigilante justice, she told him. Those are the words of the brave rebel fighter who killed the fearsome Hambadi man Wad Mahira bint Aboud. So, on that black day in the Sharia court when the police kidnapped his wife, Ayan, Malwal picked up his pistol loaded with bullets and waited for nightfall. He also traveled out of town by taxi and found his big rifle, which was hidden somewhere in the wilderness, and brought it with him. He had spent the rest of the day recalling the painful experience that he and his Dinka wife, Ayan, had gone through, inside and outside the Sharia courtroom. They were treated as two impure Christian infidels who had no rights and were separated from each other like two worthless animals. They were beaten, kicked, spit on, and insulted by the police and were subjected to ridicule and insults by hypocritical religious judges. They have become a source of amusement and laughter for passers-by. He could still see Ayan's eyes filled with tears and her face filled with fear and anticipation for what would happen to her. After several days, her screams and pleas continued to echo in his ears. "Please, my husband Malwal, save me and do not let me again fall helpless prey to rape and slavery in the house of obedience to the evil Imam." But he stood helpless, unable to save his Dinka wife from the armed policemen and their voracious police dogs. When he was unable to prevent the police from dragging his Dinka wife into their vehicle, the American husband, Malwal, ran to the home of the Southern Christian lawyer and begged him to rescue his beloved wife, Ayan, from the hands of her rapist, her abuser, and her former master. Unfortunately, Mr. Akal said, as a recognized Sudanese lawyer, he cannot do anything against the law. The Southern lawyer said that the Sharia court is part of the judicial system in Sudan. Mr. Akal knows very well that there is no judicial authority or force in the government throughout Islamic countries that can overturn the decision of the Sharia court. Even the President of the Republic of Sudan cannot appeal or revoke the decision of the Sharia court judge. The laws of the religious court are considered divine rulings revealed by God to his final prophet, Muhammad. Therefore, the Christian lawyer said to the American husband that the Sudanese Muslim people believes the Islamic Sharia laws to have been sent down by God from heaven to his infallible prophet Muhammad. All Muslims in the world believe that the Prophet Muhammad is the master of creation and came to perfect good morals, and God sent him as a mercy to mankind. For this reason, Mr. Akal advised Malwal against attempting to appeal or protest the religious decision issued by the Sharia court judge. He also said that from a legal standpoint, Iqlaz is still considered the wife of Imam Abdul Razak and not the wife of Malwal. Unless the first divorces her, the latter is not legally permitted to marry her. Whether the documents submitted by Maulana Abdul Razak to the criminal court proving his marriage to the Dinka girl Iqlaz Abdul Dang are true or forged, it is still not possible to change the decision of the Sharia court. Malwal does not have a marriage certificate proving that he married his kidnapped bride, Ayan Majak, from the Dinka village Tawila before Imam Abdul Razak married her. If Malwal confesses that he had sex with Ayan after the trial, he will be flogged before the Sharia court with 100 lashes for committing adultery with a woman who is not his wife. And his Dinka wife Ayan will be stoned to death because she committed adultery with a man while she is married to another Muslim husband. The Quran has stipulated this law and its punishment, and therefore there is no such legal way a human being in Sudan and the Islamic world can nullify it or oppose it. The demanding situation he found himself in forced Malwal to transform from a law-abiding man into a lawbreaker and murderer. He decided to take the law into his own hands, implement vigilante justice, and punish those Arab Muslims who killed members of his Dinka people in his village, Tawila, kidnapped, enslaved, and raped his bride, Ayan, and other Christian girls, stole livestock and looted the property, gold, silver, and money of innocent villagers who were slaughtered like animals. On that day, he decided that no matter what might happen to him, he had to kill the evil slave trader, Haj Ridwan al-Taishi, who killed his South African people and enslaved Christian Dinka girls, the pimping woman who turned his bride, Ayan, into a slave and a prostitute, the daughter of Al-Zubair Pasha, and the adulterous Imam, Maulana Abdul Razak al-Mahdi, who enslaved, raped, and took his kidnapped bride Ayan as the disobedient Muslim wife Iqlaz by the police through the verdict of the Sharia court to the House of Obedience. If possible, he must rescue his imprisoned bride Ayan from the house of Islamic slavery, euphemistically called the House of Obedience. He believes that assassinating the evil Imam will free her from his shackles and slavery. To successfully carry out his revenge, Malwal traveled out of the city by taxi and found his large rifle, which he had hidden in the wilderness on the day he arrived in the city of El Fasher, and found the lame old Dinka man who took him to the hotel called La Kunda of Africa. After that, the American husband returned to the city and rented a motorcycle for 24 hours. He did not inform the Southern lawyer Mr. Akal of his plan for revenge. He lied to him and said that he had accepted his wise advice and decided to leave by train the next day and travel to Kosti City. From there, he will board the ship and sail to the city of Juba, and then he must find his way back to his new homeland, the United States of America. He also said that he would try to find his Azanda wife, Olivia, in the city of Juba and persuade her to immigrate with him to the New World. On that fateful day, Malwal found the phone book and discovered the addresses of his 3 archenemies. The first evil Arab man whom he decided to send to hell was Haj Redouane Al-Taishi. When he reached his residence on his motorcycle, it was midnight. He saw 2 armed guards guarding his large house. They are both asleep on their duty. He expected that they might wake up if he tried to approach them and enter through the only gate. Moreover, he understood that a dangerous leader of the Arab jinn Jawad such as Haj Ridwan would most likely be armed and might shoot and kill him if he succeeded in deceiving the armed guards and entering his residence. So, he decided to do something to bring the evil wolf out of hiding. He used his large rifle and fired from his hiding place at one of the sleeping guards, hitting his left leg. The wounded guard began screaming from the severe pain in his foot, which was hit by the bullet. The other guard dropped his gun and rushed to save his colleague's life. Immediately, the great Satan, Haj Radwan, left his room and appeared outside with a gun in his hand. Malwal used his gun and shot him in the right ear until the bullet exited his other ear and exploded in his evil brain, killing him instantly. Quickly, the American groom jumped on his motorcycle and fled the scene before anyone else or one of the family members of the killed devil called the police. When the trained rebel soldier Malwal arrived at the huge palace of Bint al-Zubair Pasha, he discovered that there were many armed gangsters and dangerous dogs guarding her mansion surrounded by a high fence. They are all awake, standing with their firearms and smoking their cigarettes, banjos, and hookahs. Some of them appeared dead drunk and drugged like stones. He understood that his first trick, in which he killed the slave trader, might not work with these dangerous thugs and ferocious brutes guarding the palace of the pimp, Bent Satan Pasha. Therefore, he decided to make another plan to cause these armed guards and voracious dogs to make way and move from the gate so that he could enter security inside the palace of the Mother Al-Ghula or Ogre. On the ground near Malwal saw a donkey sleeping. It is tied with a rope to a post on the fence of the large house opposite to the palace of Bint al-Pasha. Malwal crawled on his knees until he was near the donkey. He then sprayed some kerosene on the wooden fence and set it on fire. The donkey woke up and started jumping and making a lot of noise while trying to escape from the fire. Members of the Bint al-Zubair Pasha gang saw the fire and all rushed with their dogs to try to put out the flame, save the donkey, and inform the house owners about the fire. When the house's wooden fencing caught fire and the guards and dogs rushed away from the gate, Malwal got the chance to enter the evil woman's palace. He found her sleeping and snoring with a sound like the howling of a wolf, while she was completely naked in one of her rooms. She looks awful, like an ogre without a cloth on her fat body. In addition, she sleeps in a large king-sized bed with the Dinka Muslim man, Abdullah Deng, who is one of her many thugs who have sex with her every night without marriage. Without his clothes, he is also completely naked and looks like a black hyena or a black wolf. The enraged Sudanese-American rebel Malwal shot the evil woman in the chest and killed her before she woke up from her sleep and screamed. He also shot the Dinka trader in his bare penis first, then shot him in his bald, square head, killing him instantly. Immediately, the brave Dinka rebel ran out of the den of thieves and murderers, returned to his motorcycle, and fled before the armed gangsters, voracious dogs, fire truck engines, hospital ambulance, and a fleet of police cars arrived at the scene of the fire and assassination of the fucking evil pimp woman Bint al-Zubair Pasha and her fucker Abdullah Deng. Chapter 54. The failed attempt to rescue the Dinka bride from the House of Obedience. The third and final stop for the Dinka groom, the brave rebel soldier Malwal, to complete the implementation of vigilante justice against the enemies of his Christian people, was in the largest mosque in the city of El Fasher. He was determined to kill the evil Imam, Abd Razak al-Mahdi. He knows it is the place of worship where many Southerners, Nuba, and Fur people were slaughtered like animals on a Black Friday when the preacher Maulana delivered his genocide sermon. His inflammatory words led to the satanic ritual of the brutal mass slaughter of many innocent Africans and the rape of hundreds of African women and underage girls. When he arrived at the Grand Mosque, the well-trained Christian rebel soldier hid in a dark, isolated corner of the street. It was 4:30 a.m. when the Imam of the mosque, Abdulrazak al-Mahdi, came to stand before his God Allah and lead Muslims in their first prayer of the day. Malwal decided not to allow him to perform his prayer that morning. He does not want his hands stained with the blood of innocents to pollute the sky with hypocritical prayer. Elsewhere in the world, a righteous Jewish man or a holy Christian woman must knock first on heaven's door on that fateful morning. The soul of the unjust Imam is doomed on that day to go to the bottomless abyss in hell and then to its final abode in the lake of fire and brimstone, which God has prepared for Satan, the Antichrist, the false prophet and their followers, devils and humans. The slave trader Haj Ridwan, the pimp Lady Bint al-Zubair Pasha, and the adulterous Imam Maulana Abdul Razak also constitute another unholy trinity. The brave rebel soldier Malwal fired once and did not miss his target. The bullet hit between the Imam's eyebrows, where the black prayer sign was formed. The shot erased that mark of the Antichrist 666 and covered the hole with blood. The evil Imam fell at the door of the mosque like a camel that was hit on the head with an axe before being slaughtered, foaming at his vile mouth. At the moment when the rapist and enslaver Imam of the kidnapped Dinka bride, Ayan, fell, the memory of her American groom, Malwal, flashed back through the events that followed his wife being transported in a police vehicle while she was chained and guarded by armed police officers. He recalled how the Imam scolded him and threatened to kill him if he dared to approach his legitimate Muslim Dinka wife, Iqlaz Abdullah Dang, again. Before the worshippers could leave the Grand Mosque to rescue their fallen spiritual leader, slaughtered like a camel on the threshold of the mosque, Malwal left his hiding place and disappeared into the dark night. He is like a black shadow that disappeared when the new morning light shone in the place. No one claimed to have seen the Imam's killer that day. The believers ran in all directions searching for the killer, but they were unable to see him even from a distance. The first time Malwal was seen again that morning was by police guards and sniffer dogs guarding the Imam's house. He came there to rescue his imprisoned Dinka wife, Ayan, from the house of slavery. He already knew that he would not have a chance to enter the heavily guarded house without being shot by the armed police officers or attacked by their ferocious police dogs. So, he implemented his final plan to save his kidnapped bride by setting fire to the wooden wall of the house. He expected that the murdered Imam was keeping Ayan in one of the huts inside his spacious residence compound. He thought that the fire would terrify the Imam's family and force them to flee the burning house. Ayan will also have to flee abroad to save her life and the life of her daughter Sakina. At that moment he must show himself to her, take her and her child on his motorcycle and ride away with them. This is how Malwal planned and executed his simple plan. It is unfortunate that he does not know that the polygamous Imam keeps Iqlaz locked up in a hut in another house. He has 4 wives and 4 houses. Malwal disguised himself as a para-Milo worker. He hid in a dark corner where he had stowed his motorcycle, waiting for the night workers to arrive in their tractor and trailer filled with human urine and feces. He dressed in dirty and torn clothes to resemble one of those wretched Nuba workers. He wore blue pants, a green shirt, and black rubber boots. On his head he wore a hat made of taffy, which no one else in Sudan wears except the Baramilo men. The only difference between him and the Baramilo workers in that disgusting job is his height and thin body, and their short stature and muscular bodies. The body of any Baramilo man is full of muscles up to his cheeks. None of the 30 Baramilo men are tall. If one of these night workers turned back and saw the tall young man who had suddenly joined them, the American groom would be in big trouble. Baramila workers have only one way to punish someone who is unruly or grotesque. They catch him and punish him immediately by dropping an entire barrel of urine and feces on his head. The offender may escape this kind of harsh punishment, but must spend the rest of his miserable life in an isolation cell in a mental hospital or insane asylum. Malwal was lucky enough that morning to escape detection by Baramila workers, police guards, and their voracious dogs. He ran behind the night train until he reached the women's toilet in the imam's house. Then he took a small bottle of kerosene out of his pocket and quickly sprayed it over a large section of the wooden wall. His hand reached back into his pocket and pulled out the matchbox. It was like a bomb that suddenly hit the women's toilet in the house and set it on fire. When other Baramila workers and police guards noticed the fire, by then Malwal had reached a building away from the scene where he hid his motorcycle. His simple plan worked well, except that his Dinka bride, kidnapped and locked in the House of Obedience as he thought, was not among the residents of the burning house who fled into the street for safety. He stood and watched until all the huts and walls were burned to the ground. The streets were crowded with neighbors and the firefighters arrived too late. Then the groom, Malwal, fell to his knees and began to cry bitterly, believing that he had burned alive his bride, Ayan, who was imprisoned in the House of Obedience. He cried and became even more sad when he thought that baby Sakina, Ayan's daughter, had also died along with her mother. His conscience was disturbed when he concluded that his wife, imprisoned in the House of Obedience, could not escape the fire because she was still chained in one of the huts. This matter had never occurred to him before he devised his simple plan to rescue her from the yoke of her slavery. This is the reason for his terrible feeling of guilt that has been eating away at his chest since he left the city of El Fasher and fled to the city of Kosti until the ship stopped in the city of Malakal 5 days later. He believed he had killed his bride's abuser, killing her and her daughter along with him as well. So, his plan to rescue his kidnapped Dinka bride failed miserably. He felt like the failed hero who killed the traitor and his heroine at the end of a horror movie. When Malwal arrives at the port city of Malakal, he does not know the whereabouts of his girlfriend, Olivia. The only information she told him about her life was that she was born and raised in Juba City. She went to school and got her nursing training there. Juba is the capital of South Sudan and is inhabited by people from every tribe and nation. Searching for someone in Juba is like searching for a needle in a huge stack of hay. However, the deep love he has for Olivia makes him do everything in his power to find her. From Malakal, Malwal continued his long journey to Juba. He had no idea how long it took to travel from north to south until he finally reached the big city of Juba. The first place he went to look for her was the General Hospital. He thought the hospital administration might have a record of her family address since she was once a nurse there. When he arrived at the hospital and inquired about a nurse named Olivia Thomas, he was not only told where her family lived, but that she was in the operating room assisting in the surgery. The good news revived Malwal's dying spirit and put a smile on his face, which had been dried by the scorching sun of the Janjaweed Desert, the bloodthirsty Muslim Mujahideen invaders. His soul had already embraced Olivia's spirit before he saw her beautiful face again. He could feel her presence everywhere in that huge hospital. The surgery was long, and the wait seemed more than a century to her American lover. Nurse Olivia finally came out of surgery in her uniform. On her face was the sweet smile that Malwal was accustomed to seeing. She leaned close to him and told the patient's relatives the good news that the surgery was a complete success. Her beautiful presence and the nice smell of her sweet perfume paralyzed Malwal's tongue and prevented him from uttering a single word. She didn't notice his presence and didn't recognize him yet. Then the Azanda beloved girl stood up and began to move away from the seat where her Dinka lover was sitting next to the relatives of the patient on whom the successful operation was performed. At that moment, her lover was able to emerge from his dark prison and scream her name. Olivia. His beloved girlfriend stopped and turned her entire body to face the person who called her name. Malwal was back on his feet by then. Olivia thought she was hallucinating when she saw her American boyfriend standing before her naked eyes. Her mouth uttered an unintelligible word. Malwal ran and hugged her. If it were possible for a lover to kill his beloved with an embrace, Mawal might have killed Olivia in those happy moments. Their bodies were glued together, and they fell as one body to the ground. They kept hugging each other for a long time and kissing on the lips, crying with joy, unaware of the other people around them looking at them. It was the most joyful and happiest moment in their lives that cannot be described in words. Chapter 55. After more than a year. While the intimate lovers are living as husband and wife in the USA, through some Sudanese refugees who recently arrived from Sudan, Mawal and Olivia obtain the new address of the Southern lawyer Mr. Akal Peter Akal, who lives with his family in Khartoum City. From their apartment in New York City, they wrote a long letter in which they told their Southern Christian lawyer how they met again in the city of Juba, the largest city in the south, and how they fled their country across the Sudanese-Kenyan border. They spent a few months in a refugee camp in Nairobi City before they were able to obtain resettlement visas for persecuted refugees in the United States and settled in the cosmopolitan New York City. The reason for their delay was that Mawal changed his name to Matthew. The two intimate lovers do not want to inform the good Southern lawyer that the American husband changed his name because he killed 3 well-known Arab citizens in the city of El Fasher and then fled to South Sudan. They also do not want such confidential information to leak to the Khartoum police. They know that the Sudanese police authority always opens and reads letters that come from abroad to some judges, lawyers, politicians, or Southerners suspected of being agents and spies hired by Western countries, especially America and Israel. They expected that the Sudanese police would inform the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation of the 3 murders carried out by Mawal in the city of El Fasher and then demand that the murderous Dinka man be extradited to Sudan to be tried and executed by hanging to death for what he had committed. Regardless of his noble motives behind the 3 assassinations through which he carried out vigilante justice against the perpetrators, Mawal may not be able to convince the American police of his innocence. 2 weeks later, Matthew and Olivia received a reply to their letter from Mr. Akal, surprising them with the good news that Ayan and her daughter Sakina had not died in the fire. The Dinka bride Ayan Majak, known as the enslaved Muslim wife Iqlaz Abdullah Dang, had gone through a long trial in which she was accused of conspiring with the killer of Imam Abdul Razak al-Mahdi, Haj Ridwan al-Taishi, and the daughter of al-Zubair Pasha. The intelligent Southern lawyer, Mr. Akal, was able to acquit her of these serious charges. After that, she and her daughter traveled with him along with his wife Mary to Khartoum City and lived in his house for a while. With the help of an international agency, Ayan Majak and her daughter Sakina Abdul Razak al-Mahdi obtained refugee status in Sudan and were resettled in Australia. Mr. Akal included in his letter the new address of the resettled refugee Ayan. Immediately, the 2 lovers Matthew and Olivia wrote to the freed Dinka girl Ayan, who currently lives in a beautiful Australian city called Sydney, and expressed their joy, thanking God for her freedom, safety, and safe escape from the land of slavery in which she suffered as an unpaid maidservant and sex slave. Her Dinka husband, Mawal, apologized for his inability to save her and her daughter from the hands of the police, who dragged her like an animal and took her to the house of slavery of the criminal Imam, as well as that he narrated to her the bold steps he took with the aim of liberating her from the house of obedience. He did not know at that time that the Imam had many homes because he had other Muslim wives. He learned this when he received the letter from the Southern Christian lawyer Mr. Akal Peter Akal a few days ago. Again, and Olivia then shared the good news in their message that they met again in South Sudan, got married, and immigrated to America, and that they had a baby girl, whom they named Ayan Iqlaz. She was given 2 names because it is a custom among Christians that the church gives a newborn child 2 names when baptizing her. The correspondence between Ayan, Mawal, and Olivia continued back and forth until Iqlaz finally surprised them by saying that she, too, had given birth to a child when she was staying with Mr. Akal's family in Khartoum City, and that she had named him after his American father, Mawal. The good news about Matthew's second child prompted the couple to discuss it until the early hours of the morning. The argument is primarily about whether Matthew should accept his second child and his mother as his everlasting Christian wife, or whether he should consider this chapter of his life with the kidnapped and formerly enslaved Dinka bride Ayan closed forever. "He is your child, and she is still your wife," said the Azanda wife, Olivia, laughing. Her Dinka husband said, "Yes, my dear, that child is my child, but she is no longer my wife." "Why not? What annulled your Christian marriage to her? Do you believe in the decision of that group of crazy Muslim judges in the Al Fasher Sharia court?" Olivia did not back down from her decision. But Matthew is firm, saying, "I do not believe in their decision, but I also cannot marry two wives at the same time. I am a Christian man, not a polygamous Muslim husband." Of course, you don't have two wives. The kidnapped Dinka bride, Ayan, has been your holy Christian wife from the beginning. "Listen, my love, Olivia," Matthew objected vehemently. "I don't want to repeat that bitter experience again. You don't know how much I suffered or how much I missed you when you suddenly left me at Mr. Akal's house. But you know, my dear Matthew, that Christian marriage is an eternal covenant. Only death can break this sacred marital union." It is clear that the Dinka husband is now upset with his Azanda wife. "I believe in love, Olivia. So, marriage should be based on love. From the beginning, I did not love my Dinka bride, Ayan, whom I had an arranged marriage with her. The beautiful Azanda rebel fighter I met in the jungle of South Sudan is the only girl I ever fell in love with, and now I want to spend the rest of my life with her." The Azanda wife Olivia's face lit up with a shy smile. "I've known you've fallen in love with me ever since we met in the forest. I also knew that you didn't love Ayan, but I was the one who forced you to take her as your wife. I did it because I believe in sacrifice. If I had taken you from her while she was alone and helpless in life in Sudan, I would have been a selfish girl. But today she lives in a better country than the land of slavery, rape, and humiliation, Sudan. She now lives with freedom and dignity for the human being, and most likely she can now take care of herself and her two children, Sakina and Malwal." He follows the reason what his Azanda wife said, and her Dinka husband must agree. Besides, Olivia continues, the Dinka girl Ayan is still young and beautiful. She will definitely meet another guy who will love her and be with her always. That day, before they went to sleep, the two lovers, Matthew and Olivia, wrote a long letter to Ayan in which they apologized for not being honest with her from the beginning. They explained the reason for the sacrifice they made to help her in her desperate situation in Sudan. The correspondence between Olivia and Ayan continued for a long time, and the two girls became particularly close friends. It wasn't long until Ayan met a young Sudanese man in Australia and fell in love with him. Matthew and Olivia took the excellent opportunity to travel from New York City to Sydney City to visit Ayan and Sakina and meet Malwal Jr. While there, they had the honor of attending the wedding of a handsome Sudanese Dinka young man named Adam, and his beloved Sudanese bride, Ayan, who was an ex-slave and former sex maid of the evil Imam, Abdul Razak al-Mahdi, and a sex-slave prostitute in the brothels and taverns huts of the late wicked pimp Bint al-Zubair Pasha when she was in her motherland, Sudan. She was kidnapped by Muslim Mujahideen invaders, sold as a slave, imprisoned, rebadged, had her genitals mutilated, beaten, raped, worked to death as an unpaid maid, became illegitimately pregnant by an old man of her grandfather's age, gave birth to an illegitimate child by him, and was repeatedly raped by the imam of the largest mosque in the city of Al Fasher and the customers of Bint al-Zubair Pasha. Her brave American husband, Malwal Deng, was the one who killed her rapist and enslaver, who was the biggest Muslim cleric in Western Sudan, and saved her and freed her forever from the house of slavery. About the author of this novel. Dr. A. Ahmed is a writer and researcher. He holds 5 university degrees, BA, MA, and PhD in philosophy and comparative studies of religion from India, and BA and MA degrees in religious studies and philosophy from Canada. He was born and raised a Muslim in eastern Sudan, but through his studies of philosophy and comparative studies of religions, he converted to Christianity. He has a writing style that is able to penetrate any religious, social, and cultural barriers and reveal the truth as it is. Moreover, his books rely on eyewitnesses because he witnessed with his own eyes the miserable conditions that Muslim women live in. He has written 25 books, but has so far published 10. His books were written in English and translated into Arabic. All of his books revolve around women's issues in Islamic societies and terrorism in Islam. His 25 novels are available for listening to them for free, read by his voice in English and Arabic on his page on YouTube.